Welcome to Rotary Time Show, a public service program presented by the Rotary District 7610 Virginia. Funding for this program is made possible by the generosity of Rotary District 7610 Virginia. On our program, we speak with Rotarians and community leaders discussing how Rotary International builds partnerships to support local, national, and world communities. I am your host, District 7610 Virginia Governor Pat Borowski. Today, we will learn from the champions of a special international project that uses volunteer drivers to provide transportation for critically ill Palestinian patients, mostly children, across the border for treatment in Israeli hospitals. It is called Project Rozana, Wheels of Hope. Welcome Rotarian Walter Ruby to our show. It's wonderful having you, Walter. Thank you so much. Would you please give some background about yourself and your little trip to Rotary, if you would?
Well, sure. So I've spent my life mainly working as a journalist for Israeli and American Jewish newspapers, having lived in Israel as a young man and been involved in all of these issues related to Israelis and the Palestinians for most of my life. And then in about 15 years ago, I got involved in Muslim-Jewish relations here in the greater Washington area, well, actually nationally, and then now I'm focused mostly on greater Washington. So I was, again, organizing events bringing together Muslims and Jews to strengthen relationships here in the States. And it was through that contact that I met Dr. Maksud Chaudhry, the president of Rotary E-Club 7610. And so Maksud, first of all, Maksud had always said to me that he thought that the Muslim-Jewish work we were doing here in the States was really important, but he also said, what are we doing to help the Palestinians? And then, and I didn't necessarily have a good answer for him at that point, but several years ago, I got involved with this group, Project Rozana, which is doing this work on the ground to improve healthcare for Palestinians and build ties of friendship and trust between Israelis and Palestinians. So I joined Rotary through Maksud, actually to bring this awareness to Rotary, and now I'm very much into Rotary, through this and beyond, and very much in love with the message of service that it conveys.
Well, thank you so much. I know that you're relatively new to Rotary, but can you tell us a little bit about the E-Club?
Well, the E-Club was begun several years ago, and before everybody became an E-Club.
Right.
A little before I got involved, maybe 3 years ago. And it has about 28 to 30 members, I think maybe 28 is the last I heard. But every meeting has been, it was set up for every meeting to be held via Zoom, essentially. And, so it's a wonderful group of people. And one of the points, you had mentioned, I think folks are interested that it's incredibly diverse ethnically and on all kinds of levels. I mean, before I moved, I kind of always thought of Northern Virginia is pretty homogenous. I was totally wrong, obviously. Totally wrong, or maybe it was way out of date. So to have a president like Maksud is just a wonderful, wonderful man, and is Pakistani American, says volumes. But there's people of all backgrounds.
Well, that's great. Now,
Muslims, Jews, Christians, and many others.
Right. Now, tell us just a little bit short about the program, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about the organization that sponsors this program. So if you would.
So the program that we are working on, that we're actually been working on raising money and working, is called Wheels of Hope, and that is to say that the E-Club is sponsoring this program, and we're asking for district designated funds for it for this coming year, and other ways. But this is a program that is actually implemented by a group called Project Rozana, which is a group that was founded about 2013, almost 8 years ago. What the name is, people say, well, where's that name from, Rozana? So Rozana was a little girl, maybe about 8 or 9 years old, who living in a Palestinian area just outside of Jerusalem. And she fell off out of her family's, I think it was their 10th floor balcony.
Oh
So
my.
this girl hurtled to the ground and was obviously very smashed up, her body.
Oh wow.
And but they were able to get her to a hospital, a top hospital inside of Israel, which was only a few kilometers away. But because of the situation there, that's not always so simple to arrange, or that's
Right.
the understatement of the year. They were able to do it. They saved her life, and out of that story came the whole effort to make this possible for other Palestinians, to help them get to hospitals in Israel, because the healthcare is so much better in Israel.
Right.
And also we do other things like training Palestinian doctors to help bring the level of the healthcare in Palestine up to a higher level, and some treatment obviously of these children.
Right.
Well, specifically, so again, this is about getting these the Wheels of Hope is about bringing Palestinian children who are sick with cancer or need a kidney dialysis, and so if we don't get them to those hospitals, they will not survive.
Right.
And part of the issue is that if they live out in a remote village in the West Bank somewhere, or in Gaza, because we also bring them from Gaza, there's no transportation. There's no public transportation to get them to
Right.
Israel. And the families can't afford to pay, hundreds of dollars for taxis. It just
Sure.
is, they're quite poor. So that's what we do. So we as you said, Pat, we have volunteer drivers that we've created through working with other NGOs in Israel and Palestine. We have
Right.
Palestinian volunteer drivers that bring the kids to the border from their homes inside of Palestine, usually with their caretakers. And
Correct.
then once they get across, then they are taken by Israeli drivers to the hospitals
Right.
in Israel.
And I don't think most of our listeners really appreciate that there is, in fact, a physical border between the Palestinian area and the Israeli area, and people, transportation, etc., is not allowed to cross. So you do have to organize a network of Palestinian drivers to take them to that border, and then you have to organize a group of Israeli drivers who will then receive the child and understand that they are taking them to the hospital. Now, this is such a wonderful program. How did the E-Club get involved? Why don't you talk about the trip that you organized?
Well, as I said, Maksud Chaudhry and I kind of had a cross-fertilization. He brought me into Rotary, and I brought him into the board of Project Rozana that runs the Wheels of Hope program and the others I mentioned. And so last February, just literally days before, COVID hit in full force, and we barely got out. We barely,
Right.
both of us kind of got out on last flights out of there. But so it was quite interesting. But it was a mission essentially of members of the board of Project Rozana to see these programs, and it was really, really inspiring for both Maksud and myself because we spent one day in particular that was very memorable. There's a place a town called Beit Jala, which is just outside of Jerusalem, but it's in the Palestinian area, right on the border, so people can access that town from both sides, which again is very, very hard, as you said, Pat, because most people can't cross the border, certainly from the Palestinian side. So we went there, and they had a meeting there of the people involved in the program. They had volunteer drivers from both sides, Israeli and Palestinian. And then they had 2 children whose lives had been saved by this program, a girl
Wow.
of about 11 years old and a boy of 8 with their parents. And it was amazing, that the mother of the little girl said, I never would have believed Israelis would actually help to save my child. And it was, very, very moving. And then to meet the volunteer drivers, especially the Palestinian drivers, who are mostly young men in their 20s who get up every morning at like 4:30 in the morning, make a couple of trips with these
Wow.
kids. And then they have to, by 8 a.m., they have to be in their day jobs. So
Right.
that they make this kind of sacrifice because they said, these are our little brothers and sisters, and this is what
Sure.
we
This is a
them.
true humanitarian effort.
Right.
Walter, we're going to break at this time, and then we're going to pick it up on the other side of our break and speak more about this program. We will take a short break, and be right back and speak further with Walter Ruby in terms of this new Rotary project. Please stay with us.
We are this close.
We're this close.
We are this close
Of wanting tea.
to making history.
This close to changing the world.
We are this close.
This close.
This close to making sure no child suffers a crippling disease.
Ever again. This close.
We are this close to ending polio.
Ending polio.
All we need is you.
This close.
If we don't act now, we may lose this chance forever. Help Rotary make history at endpolionow.org.
Welcome back to Rotary Times. We are here speaking with Rotarian Walter Ruby about the Rozana International Program that provides transportation for critically ill Palestinian patients, mostly children, across the border for treatment in Israeli hospitals. Now, Walter, you wanted to add an additional point regarding the crossings.
Sure. So actually, 2 points I wanted to add, actually, because as you know, the violence that's been going on now for several weeks, everyone knows about that. But it's so interesting that the program we're talking about, the Getting the Kids Across the Border, is continuing all throughout this effort, certainly from the West Bank, although not from the Gaza Strip, which is really where the heavy bombing was. But nevertheless, most of the kids are getting across even now. And we'll go back to full thing once the ceasefire holds and all that. But the other thing, though, Pat, which is really interesting that many people don't know, and I certainly didn't know until I got involved in this, was that the crossing of the border for the kids when they physically get to the border is actually the easy part, because this has been prearranged by the government of Israel and the Palestinian Authority, which is very interesting. They cooperate on this. Right. And actually, it has to do with Israel collects taxes for the Palestinian Authority, and then provides them with that chunk of money. Mm-hmm. And then out of that money, one of the things which they use for basic services in Palestine, but one of the things they do is use it for hospital visits, to help pay for hospital visits for for sick Palestinians who need to go to hospitals in Israel. So that really does. At the border, they already know that these kids are coming, and there's very rarely that there's any holdup. They cross right away. But again, if we didn't have the transportation to get them to the border and then the transportation to get them to the hospitals, it wouldn't work. Right,
exactly. And so again, this is something where everybody is recognizing it's greater than a conflict. It is something of the soul and really a mission of Rotary. Now, as you've moved forward, tell us about a little bit more about your funding and your partnerships.
Okay, so well, in terms of the funding, we had set a goal for this effort that we're engaged in for Wheels of Hope. I think $20,000. About half of that is being raised through 3 clubs within District 7610. McLean and Dulles Airport and our own E-Club are going to be contributing our DDF funds for in the coming year for this program. Correct. But in addition to that, we have some other clubs that are making financial contributions, not from DDF money, but from other monies that they have. So that adds a chunk. And then we have an outside foundation which has given us a $10,000 gift. So essentially, we're well over the $20,000, but we're still fundraising, and I'll be speaking to different Rotary clubs in 7610 in the coming weeks, and can keep so that remains open. Everything we're doing.
And I think the example is excellent for clubs to be paying attention to, in the sense that you are using district grants as a way of stepping into a longer term, a larger Rotary Global grant. Additionally, you have partners outside of Rotary, which is what our foundation is encouraging everyone to do. So I thank you for giving us that detail. So what are the plans? You talked a little bit about the current conflicts. And how do you handle that as an organization?
Well, we try to be we are apolitical. That's
Yeah.
number one, and we work very closely with both sides. So for example, last year we raised quite a bit of money, and I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right.
That is, say, Project Rozana, not Rotary, but to buy ventilators for the Palestinians. When COVID hit, they didn't have any ventilators, and we I think we're able to buy 20 ventilators that we got from through Australia, where actually the founder of Project Rozana is from, so he had good connections in the government there. But so we what was really was very, very inspiring was when we were able to brought the first ventilators. The foreign minister of the state of Palestine in Ramallah received the first ventilators from the representative of Project Rozana from Israel, who himself happened to be a Druze, which is neither a Jew or a Muslim or a Christian, but a small minority faith, but Arabic speaking. So we have these really good relationships, and again, everyone thinks when you see violence like has been going on, it must just be hell, and there's but there's a lot going on below the surface, and a lot of it is these kind of humanitarian programs which really are doing incredible work in terms of saving lives and improving conditions.
So the reality is that Rozana is a larger organization, and the particular program we're speaking about today is Wheels of Hope, which is one of those programs under there. And how many organizations do you have involved in this in Palestine and Israel, your outreach?
Well, for example, on the Wheels of Hope effort, there are two Israeli not-for-profit organizations that one is called Humans Without Borders, which is a group of Israelis in the Jerusalem area, and another one, what's the other one's name? I'll think of it. There's another Israeli organization, and both of these supply us with the volunteer drivers. And then there's a volunteer organization on the Palestinian side called the Greenland Society for Development, for Health Development, and they, a wonderful organization in the area of Hebron, and so they do many things to help. We work closely with them on health issues and on many levels, but one of them is that they help us to. They're the ones who reach out and find the volunteer drivers on the Palestinian side.
That's terrific. Go ahead.
And I just remember the name of the other organization. It's called the Israeli one. It's called Road to Recovery.
Right.
And it was actually founded by a guy named Yuval Roth, whose brother was killed in the conflict, and instead of sort of hating the other side, he helped to create this Road to Recovery because he saw this was a real need. So there's so many wonderful organizations like that, and we
wonderful.
Work
and then how, in terms of presenting it to the club, how did that process go in the presentation to the board and the decision by the club? I know a lot of our clubs are interested in understanding that whole how-to implementation process.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just, really kind of went through it together with Maksud. I mean, Maksud was a huge help because he's a longtime Rotarian and has that credibility, obviously, as president of the club. He bought into it totally. And the approach was, that this is something we can do to save lives and improve conditions there. And, again, in the middle of a conflict, people tend to, get involved, obviously, in the politics and who's right and who's wrong. And there's points to be made on both sides. And we could argue about that all day. Or alternatively, we could save lives and do what we're doing here. And so it just seemed, I guess it was just a natural fit for Rotary because the response has been so positive and so enthusiastic, both in the E-Club and in some of the other clubs that we brought this to, and through Zoom.
Right. And then you're also available to be speaking to clubs about the project or about the broader Rozana organization and/or your background. Quite frankly, your background is fascinating, and I know that you probably have many a tale to tell.
Well, I guess so. It's been, yes, I say I've been, involved in this work in this field of this for my whole life. And actually, I have a book that just came out that I wrote with a Muslim American co-author named Sabia Rehman called "We Refuse to Be Enemies."
Okay.
And just talking about the importance of building Muslim-Jewish ties here in America, not to let the kind of fear and loathing that unfortunately is still very strong over there, over in Israel,
Sure.
Palestine, to
Sure.
come here. But we ourselves want to be part of the solution over there, and that's where a program like Rozana is really, really important.
Well, what are the next steps for the project of the Wheels of Hope?
Well, the Wheels of Hope has already been around for a number of years, and it's one of these things that you just need to maintain it because it's, basically the money, I should say, that we'll be raising, with our $20,000 will make it possible, I think, for two Palestinian and two Israeli drivers. It'll cover their petrol expenses, which is gas expenses, which is
Sure.
a huge amount. Pay for PPE and other things like that. So we constantly need to keep. Oh yeah, and then the other thing is that because of COVID, of the whole COVID crisis, which still continues, a lot of the Israeli volunteer drivers who tend to be elderly were naturally over the last year afraid of frankly
Right.
of doing it.
Sure.
So in some cases now we have to actually spend money on taxi trips because there just isn't. And so that runs into real money, and so that's another piece of what we're raising the money for. So it's really kind of but this is such an essential program, and we do something like even I just checked this, that last year, even though COVID reduced the number of patients, we actually did 20,000 trips during the year, or transfers they call them. In other words, 20,000 drives from
Sure.
And so basically we're talking about 400 a day, and if you kind of do the math,
Right.
and so that's a lot of people who were being saved.
Yes, absolutely, no question about that.
And so many of them have to go back and forth every day, like the kids with the need of the dialysis. I mean,
Yes.
it's literally they've got to go, if not every day, then 3-4 times a week, and that this would be impossible without this.
And if they had to use private taxis, I mean, it's just unaffordable. Absolutely. And, this is similar, we were discussing yesterday, similar to a program that we actually have in the United States. It's not because of the border issues, but it's because of distance. A lot of people who live in the West, and if you're VA dependent, the VA systems may be as much as 100+ miles away from you. And so they do have these volunteer caravans that go back and forth. I mean, this is just a wonderful project. And how do you hope it will grow?
Well, I think that in terms of looking toward the global grant, there's many, besides Wheels of Hope, there's many other things that we're doing in terms of training of doctors is one area where
Right.
which is so important. I mean, we have doctors who are superb doctors, just needing that extra year or two of training to really bring this work of for example, pediatric oncologists who can then bring this work back to the hospitals they're at in Palestine.
Sure.
So we have one woman who I've met who's just amazing, who is being trained at Hadassah Hospital in Israel. She only lives 5-10 miles away, but it's like it's like a different world. And so that will give that's one big area. Another program for which we received some funding from the European Union, but is very important, and is one called the psychotherapy, basically training social workers and therapists from both Israel and Palestine. The International School for Psychotherapy, I think it's called. So training them so that they can deal with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a huge problem in both countries, as you can imagine, because of the constant conflict. And so many children have been traumatized, adults have been traumatized, but that's a really essential skill that,
Absolutely. I mean, we see that in our own country, and we can only imagine how they had a similar program for Northern Ireland conflict. because of that same issue of being in just a pressure cooker of events. But it's programs like yours, Rozana, Wheels of Hope, and in partnership with Rotary, because that is what we do. It is apolitical, and it is focused on there is a need, let's meet it, and let's get the job done. Well, I am so happy that you've been with us. Any last few comments?
Well, it's so moving for me to have this opportunity to bring this to Rotary, and the incredibly warm response we've received, just is very, very moving. That people here care. There's so much that they're willing to, to get involved, and they've really opened their hearts up to the whole Rozana program. So it's been just wonderful, fulfilling for me, and I'm just looking forward to working together with Rotary for many years to come.
Oh, absolutely, and we're looking forward to you being a Rotarian for many years. Walter, thank you so much for being with us, and I really appreciate. Good luck with that project, and we'll be talking, okay? Thank you.
Pat. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Yes.
Funding for this program is made possible by the generosity of Rotary District 7610, Virginia. From the Rotary Times program, I am your host, District 7610, Virginia Governor Pat Borowski. You are welcome to join us at a Rotary Club in your area for breakfast, lunch, dinner, or a service project. You can find a club near you by looking us up on the internet. Many clubs are hosting meetings virtually or in some form of virtual hybrid format. You just need to look us up for the details. Remember, our time is your time, and together it is time well spent. Please join us for our next program as we continue to celebrate Rotary's 116 years of doing good in the world by service above self.